pour libations for those who got here. Some of them got here and they just got off the boat and they were free. Some of them took over the boat, they weren't seeing that behind it. Some of them escaped into the Seminole area in Florida. Some of them escaped out west. Some of us was never slaves. Pour libations for them. But those are our ancestors had to undergo that horrible pattern of slavery. They weren't even considered human. They underwent terrible torture, terrible beatings, hangings, mutilations, but they survived so that we would be here today. I'm going to pull our base for them. I want you to call out names of ancestors that meant something to you personally. Your mother, your father, or your grandparents, or some neighbors who meant something to your family. Pour libations for them and call out their names. In my case, Edward S. McCoy. Ashe.
Junius and Eudora Stanton. Langley and Elsie Stanton. Lloyd Stanton.
And really, we should be raised off of the ground. We should be floating right now with all of the energy and all the spiritual essence from our ancestors. And we got a number of them, so I'm going to pull our babies for those who got, and I'm going to pull our babies for those who we didn't know meant something to those who meant something to us. So I'm going to pull our babies for them. Now I want you to call on ancestors who not only meant something to you personally, but to your community, to your nation, and to your race. International ancestors, like El-Hajj Al-Malik Shabbat.
Marcus Garvey. Noble Drew Ali. Cecil Moore.
Anna Julia Cooper.
Dr. Ben. John Henry Clark.
Joe Lewis. We would be here all day if I waited for you to call them all, because there are many people that did things that were good for us. So I'm going to just pour libations for all of them, those who we didn't mention. Ashe. And finally, I'm going to pour libations for the unborn. Those who depend on us to build the bridges for them to cross over and have the shoulders for them to stand on. And when they come back, they're going to come back with the spirit of an ancestor. You're going to look at a little child and say, just like Aunt Lady. She has the spirit of Aunt Lady. There's a little Malcolm. There's a Martin Delaney. There's a Queen T. They're coming back with the spirit of ancestors, because we don't believe we die. We believe it's a continuation from the unborn to those of us on top of the earth to the ancestors, and the ancestors come back. So I'm going to pour libations for them. Ashe, 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 oh! Let's give Brother Ron McCoy a big round of applause. The other side of this grassy area, why it is we're here. And I want to go into a little more detail about why it is we are here. And it's only going to take maybe 15 minutes, no more than 20 minutes, but I encourage people to listen very, very closely. First of all, in 1852, Frederick Douglass asked a powerful question. What to the enslaved black man, woman, and child is your 4th of July? He essentially said it's the height of historical hypocrisy. But what I want to do at this point is kind of go beyond what Brother Frederick Douglass said. Because you don't have to be black to recognize the hypocrisy of the United States. You can be white. You can be Asian. You can be Latino. Well, Latino is black, so that's the same thing. But you can be any other ethnic group and appreciate the horrors of American history. And what do I mean by that? Well, before I get into American history and what it's all about, let me put all of this stuff in context. When we talk about slavery, we're not talking about just the loss of freedom, because when people get arrested and convicted and go to jail, they lose their freedom. So we're talking about much more than the loss of freedom. We're talking about the loss of land. We're talking about the loss of language, of religion, of culture, of name, of family. Just imagine this, if you will, July 4, 2016, especially my white brothers and sisters out there. And let's say some Martians came down right now. And while you're out here with your family, your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, those Martians come down and they snatch up your brother, or they snatch up your mother, or they snatch up your sister, and they take them up to Mars. And they're not quite Martians on Mars, and they're certainly no longer Earthlings on Mars. They lost their land, their language, their culture, and not just for a day, or a week, or a month, or a year, or a decade, or a century, but for at least 246 years. Imagine that happening to your family. Imagine right now, as you're on this tour, on July 4th, 2016, you're with your 6-year-old son, you're with your 24-year-old sister, you're with your 67-year-old grandfather, and these Martians come down and snatch them up and take them away. That's what happened to us. We had our schools, we had our mosques, we had our churches, we had our things going on, and the Europeans came in and snatched us up and took away our land and our culture and our religion and our language and everything that makes us human. Now you might hear me here and say, what is this angry black guy talking about? And you're right, I am black, I am a guy, and I'm angry. And why am I angry? I'm angry for the very same reason that James Baldwin said to be black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. For my white brothers and sisters out there, take away the racial implications. Imagine in terms of what the Europeans did to the Africans. Let's flip it. Let's say that the people from Ghana or Senegal or the Ivory Coast got onto ships and went to Europe and went to France and England and London and snatched up Europeans and brought them to Africa and made them build up Africa for 246 years. You'd be outraged by that. So I'm hoping that folks are not so angry with me being angry that they shut down and not listen. But I'm not really here to convert people. I'm just here to tell you the truth. You can accept it or reject it. It's nothing I can do about it. But the truth goes something like this when we talk about slavery in America. On August 20, 1619 in Angola, August 20, 1619 in well, let me fast forward. August 20, 1619 in Virginia. But let's back up to 1617. The Portuguese, and Portugal is in Europe, the Portuguese, for whatever reason, were able to dominate the navigation. In other words, they were able to figure out how to create these magnificent ships and go all over the world. So when the Portuguese encountered black people, and these were peace-loving people, people who were not warlike, people who tried to help, then that helpfulness on the part of the Africans turned into their help. So now the Portuguese, 1617, come to Africa, begin to enslave the Africans. And by the way, before I finish the story about 1617, fast forward up to 1619, I know many of you are probably going to say, well, yeah, that black guy was talking about the slavery stuff, but he never mentioned that black people sold black people to Europeans. Didn't Africans sell Africans to Europeans? The answer is yes. But to blame them is like blaming that young black drug dealer from the projects for the drugs that flood this country. Yeah, that young black drug dealer is doing a bad thing by selling drugs, but where did he get those drugs from? He doesn't own any ships, he doesn't own any boats, he doesn't own any major corporations, he's just a peon. So for one thing, those Africans who sold Africans were the exception, a small minority. But even beyond that, this is the key component. I want you all to remember this when folks come at you with the nonsense about black folks sold black folks. The European slavery, the European form of slavery, was unique in the history of humankind. In other words, when African ethnic groups or African tribes fought each other, and yes, blacks fought blacks, like whites fought white, and Asians fought Asians, and Latinos fought Latinos, people just fight each other. But when Africans fought with other Africans, and defeated another African tribe, they would capture the man. And they would hold the man in custody and make him do labor. So when these warlike African tribes would capture other men, because they didn't do it to women, they didn't do it to children, they acknowledged that when the Europeans came along, they would treat their so-called slaves the same way the Africans treated their so-called slaves. In other words, you capture a man and you hold that man, but that man keeps his name, his religion, his culture, his property, his children. It's not intergenerational. So what black folks were doing was simply fighting with other black tribes and capturing those who they defeated. End of statement, period, exclamation point. So what the Europeans did with their form of slavery, taking land, religion, culture, language, family, was completely unique. So if somebody comes at you with, well, black folks sold black folks, tell them that's BS. Having said that, let me jump into what I was talking about with 1617. So the Portuguese, who basically had the sea and navigational thing on lockdown, they come to Angola in 1617. ATAC, ATAC, Avenging The Ancestors Coalition. Let me quickly tell you how we came into existence. As I mentioned when I was standing over there earlier, it was announced in a local newspaper that the Liberty Bell Center at 5th and Market was going to move a block west to 6th and Market because the area there was too small, too cramped, too congested, and they wanted larger space over here. That was announced in 2002. We in the black community said interesting, but not really relevant to us. The second thing we found out in 2002 is that when they moved over here, this site here, 6th and Market, it wasn't called Market Street then, it was called High Street. But this site here is where America's first White House stood. It was known as the Executive Mansion. The President's House was its official name, but it's also known as the Robert Morris Mansion. And let me quickly tell you why. When Congress passed something called the Federal Residence Act of 1790, they designated Philadelphia as the capital temporarily because they were building up Washington, D.C. At the time, Washington was swampland, known as Federal City. So they're trying to level that up and do what they had to do. In the process, they made Philadelphia temporary capital. So they had to bring George Washington here, but they couldn't just put him in any house in Philly. They had to find the best, biggest, and most majestic house in Philly. And so they found this house here on High Street, now known as Market Street. And that house was owned by Robert Morris. Why is that important? It's important because Robert Morris was the biggest slave trader in Philadelphia history. So that wealth from slavery allowed him to build this magnificent house. So Congress gave that house to George Washington so that he could be America's first White House. That's the history of slavery. So remember what I said about ATAC. ATAC, Avenging The Ancestors Coalition. 2002, the Liberty Bells moved from 5th and Market to 6th and Market. 2002, we find out this is America's first White House. 2002, we find out that George Washington enslaved 316 black men, women, and children at his Mount Vernon